Hello, everyone, and welcome to Classical Revolution here on IDAGIO. My name is Rachel Fenlon, and this is my weekly series in which I get the great pleasure of chatting with guests in the classical music world, people who inspire me, people who are pushing boundaries in music, and speaking with them about what inspires them. Today, I'm really thrilled to be joined by conductor Jonathan Darlington. Celebrated in his broad repertoire from opera to symphonic music, and appearing regularly with orchestras and opera houses around the world, such as Paris Opera, Oper Frankfurt, the Vienna State Opera, Vancouver Opera, Opera Australia, the English National Opera, BBC Symphony Orchestra. Jonathan is the former music director of the Duisburg Philharmoniker and has held the position of music director at Vancouver Opera for 20 years. He is now the music director emeritus at Vancouver Opera. And on a slightly personal note, I sang my first leading opera roles with Jonathan at the baton at Vancouver Opera. So it's really special to have him on the show today. Please welcome Jonathan Darlington. Hi, Jonathan.
Hello. Hi. So good to see you.
Good to see you too. It's the first time I think we ever saw each other not in person in a theater.
It's very strange. Yeah, you have a nice background behind you in the studio.
Yes. Exactly. Jonathan, I'd love to begin by asking you what your earliest introduction to music was and whether there are any specific musical memories which jump out to you as being really important for you.
Yes, well, I was a cathedral chorister, so I was a little boy singer in the cathedral, in Worcester Cathedral. So that's where my musical, I guess, education started. My parents played piano, all sorts of things. My brother, who is he's much more famous than I am in England because he was for many years the cathedral organist and professor at University in Oxford of Christchurch, and so he was an organist. So he became a professional musician. So he's older than I am. So he played piano and violin and stuff. So there was music all around all the time. And then, as I say, I was a cathedral chorister, and that sort of started me, I guess, on my professional musical road, I guess. So between the ages of 8 and when my voice broke, 12, 13, that's what I was doing. And so there are a lot of special memories. Actually, talking of voice breaking, I was at Worcester Cathedral, and there's a Three Choirs Festival. Perhaps some of your audience members know this. Perhaps you know this. I don't know. But it's the choirs of Worcester Cathedral, Gloucester Cathedral, and Hereford Cathedral. And every year they get together and do a festival. And in that year, I was due to do a solo in a piece by Luigi Dalla Piccola. And there was another piece by Elizabeth McConkie, who'd written a piece specially for the occasion. And I was due to do the solo. And that morning, I woke up, my voice went like this. So that was a meaningful experience for me. And it was tragic because, I was going to be singing in this big festival, and the cathedral, it's a wonderful experience. The whole cathedral is full. So you're talking about, well, I don't know how many thousands are in there, but a lot, And it was a live radio broadcast and all the rest of it. And my voice just decided, time is up. That was it.
But that didn't hinder you from pursuing a life in music. I mean, that's something.
No, but actually at that time, I was playing instruments and things and doing all the rest, but I was much more interested in playing cricket and rugby. I was very sporty. And there was this conflict all through my childhood, my adolescence, everything. There was a conflict between doing sport, and all the people, all the sports masters wanted me to do that stuff, and all the music masters wanted me to be playing instruments and doing all the rest of it. And it's silly, really, why there should be this conflict, but there was, certainly in the school in which I grew up. But anyway, I ended up not wrecking my body too much playing rugby and cricket. I mean, ended up doing the music. So that's that.
Yeah. And I mean, I know that you kind of began professionally as a pianist, and that's an interesting part of your story, I think. I would love to ask you particularly about, I know you played a lot of lieder and chamber music in those beginning years, and how you feel that sort of set you up for a life as an opera conductor, for example.
Yeah, I'm my nature is as a chamber musician. And so when I when I conduct, I try and make chamber music on a big, well, it doesn't necessarily be a big scale, but a bigger scale, if you like. So that's my my leaning. It has always been towards chamber music. I was never a soloist as a pianist. I actually started on the viola. My first instrument for a long time was the viola, and then the piano took over because the viola is slightly limited. The piano has a few more options available to it, and nothing against the viola. Just I love the instrument, but anyway, that was my leaning. And yeah, I spent the first 15 years of my professional life as a chamber musician, but mainly, I guess, doing recitals with singers. And that's what led me into working in opera houses. And that's from there was a logical step to go to be dumped in the deep end conducting. But I'm from my nature is I like intimate things, and I like the song repertoire, whatever it be, whether it's Lieder or French song or whatever. I love it because I love the poetry. And that's so the marriage of the music and the words was something that is really important to me. So when I'm working on opera, that's something that I really go for.
Yeah. And for example, kind of achieving this, what you say, this chamber music quality in a large scale opera. I mean, what are some of the things that how would you put that into practice, for example?
Well, I think it's very easy. I think it's, people listening to each other. And I very often say in rehearsals, I don't know if you remember, but I very often say, just, listen. A conductor is there, I guess, as someone who's coordinating all that, but enabling people to listen to each other. And so, if somebody is playing a solo, then everybody's listening to it. And those who are accompanying in a way which is supportive and also adding color to the solo, that kind of thing. So it's basically using these things on the side of one's head that we all have. But it's when you're in a big group, it's very easy to lose contact with them, strangely enough. But and if you're a big group of violins, you're not necessarily concentrating on what the second oboe is playing, and that's the trick, to try and get people to listen to those things, listen to the inner details and all that sort of stuff. And I guess that's how I go about doing it.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I do remember that. Jonathan, you've been music director at Vancouver Opera, and well, now you're music director emeritus for 20 years. And this is a sizable amount of time with one opera company. Of course, guesting and living in Europe all the meanwhile. And I imagine that the discoveries and growths that you must make personally and also with the company and with the orchestra must be enormous to be given this amount of time.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Carry on.
No, I suppose my question is, I'm curious about how that trust is built with an orchestra over that amount of time, and what kind of risks, you're able to take, and how that evolves with a company for you.
Well, that's a really interesting question. I'm not sure I know the answer to that, really, because one is developing oneself, as it goes along. So I guess one takes risks, but then there's a support mechanism sort of around, once people build up a trust, because it's the musicians, the chorus, the singers, the administration, everybody has to trust you, and you have to trust them. So I guess I'd say that it boils down to that. It's a question of trust. How much, and then you foster that. You try, and there are sometimes difficult decisions to be made, and one doesn't necessarily get it right. That's for sure, because we're all human and we make mistakes. But I think if there's a basic trust that people looking at you as a conductor know that you know what you're doing, first of all, and that you're willing to let people express themselves, then I think that builds up some trust. I think that's really important, actually, the willingness to let people express themselves rather than being a control freak. It's a dangerous path. It's a harder path. It's a more difficult path. I think it's more rewarding. That's the only way I can work. I can't be a control freak. I can't do that. I think it's a harder path because you're laying yourself open and you're saying to the other person, okay, I trust you, then you trust me. And if you lay that down, then even if the path might be thorny, I think it probably pays dividends in the end. And you know, I have been there for 20. I've been there for 20 years, and I've grown this, as you say, a Emeritus, a Gandalf white beard thing that's growing. So, but I'm not sure. It seems difficult to believe that I've been there for 20 years, but I guess I have been, because that's what the figures say. That's what you know.
Well, that's what the biography says. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it must be right then.
No, I mean, that's a really beautiful point, that it's, the trust is also about allowing each other to express them yourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I suppose because you're on top, as well as this, you're guesting a lot in different houses across Europe and North America. And so I just imagine that this must be a really fulfilling experience, a very different experience to be working, kind of continually building a relationship with an orchestra. You must get to take different kinds of, I mean, I wonder, do you take different kinds of risks in the moment in a performance with an orchestra you know so well?
Oh, yeah, that's.
What does that do for sort of the immediate music making? Just curious.
I guess so, because people, we know each other so well that yes, there is an intuition that's going on, which allows probably that, which you don't have with a group that you're working with for the first time necessarily. That's true. A lot of the orchestras that you talked about, well, some of them anyway, that you talked about in your introduction, I go back regularly.
Yeah, right.
In Dresden, for instance, I go back there, 2, 3, 4 times a year or something. And so there's a communication that's built up, and it is something where the intuition does help, because you know each other so well, and I enjoy that, because I never, as you know, I never really do the same thing twice, even in rehearsal. I mean, in rehearsal process, I sort of do it on purpose, I guess, to get people used to the fact that they have to be flexible. And it's a conscious decision, but then that goes into the performance as well. It's a music making performance, so that everybody is aware that other things can happen, and that does take time to build up, I guess, that kind of that confidence. If coming back to the last point, that's part of the feeling of confidence, that you know, okay, the person in front of us is not going to do the same thing. We know that, and so we're willing to go along with this and make something else happen.
Yeah. I mean, in addition to this sort of relationship that you're building with the orchestra in this kind of position, I'm always curious about conductors and your relationship with the audience, because, you know, your back is to the audience and us, we're facing out and we're often talking with them. And how does that feel for you as a conductor? And does that change when you, for example, are somewhere, like also you're in Duisburg for a long time, holding a music director position? Does that change when you're really sort of a part of the community? Do you feel a different feeling towards your audience? Or do you think about that?
You know, it's not something I know that the audience, if you're on the concert platform, it's a different experience from when you're in the pit, because the audience can't really see you. Well, if they can see you, they can see you from upstairs, I guess, but they just think it's on your head or something. Unless you're in Vienna, of course, when you're much more exposed, you're higher up, and the orchestra's higher up, and all that sort of stuff. And I think I am aware that one's back tells a story as well. You know, you tell a story with your gestures, with your eyes, with your facial expressions, but you also tell a story with your back. And I think that's really important, that the audience is connected to something where somehow you have to speak to them visually through your back. And it's something that I worked on a long time ago, and I still do work on it, that one's whole body somehow, where it can be just in minimal gestures, it doesn't have to be big things, but somehow one's whole body is living music. And yeah, and as I say, it doesn't have to be big gestures, something very extrovert, It can be very small gestures,
Yeah.
but somehow you're engaging people behind you with your body. That's they're looking at you. So you know, if you're not aware of that, or if you're not conscious that you can change people's way of experiencing something, then I think it's a shame.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
So I'd love to talk to you a little bit about something that you do a lot, which is bel canto repertoire. And because for me, this is perhaps one of like the most beautiful sort of staples of our genre, and also most mysterious somehow, because it's, well, for many reasons. But I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about the landscape of this tradition, and what you feel the challenges and power are within this music.
Wow, it's the repertoire is sensational, first of all. But you mentioned tradition,
Mhm.
which is a sort of bugbear, really. There's a wonderful phrase from Mahler, to paraphrase him, which he says, you know, tradition is the keeping of the fire. You know this quote?
No.
Basically the inner fire, not the fanning of the ashes. And
Hmm.
that always comes back to me, because you know we have so many, in inverted commas, traditions going on, and a lot of them are just there because some famous person has decided to do a whacking great ritardando or this, that, and the other. So it doesn't necessarily have much meaning as musically speaking. So I think it's a tightrope. You know, you're walking on eggs a little bit in this whole repertoire. But if I come back to the very beginning of our conversation, which was, you know, I started life as a chamber musician, and especially working with singers. That I think has helped me enormously as a conductor through this whole repertoire, because you learn to breathe with singers, and you learn to try and guide them through phrases, and so that the difficult passages which happen in this repertoire, I mean, you know, some of this is phenomenally difficult, and you know, as you know, as a soprano, how, you know, getting lost in some of those runs, it can be treacherous. And so I think as a conductor, if you don't understand that, then you can't really help the singer. And in order to be able to understand that, you have to understand the lives of these composers. You have to understand the social context, the economic context. You have to understand what they were reading, who they were visiting with, who, you know, there's a whole, it's a wonderful, rich world out there. And once you begin to absorb all that, I think some of these traditional things fade into the background, because they become, you know, that's not the point. The point is how that composer is treating the human voice, and in what context they're trying to express themselves. You know, if you take Bellini as somebody, so my wife is now director of the ballet company in Naples, and so I'm partly in Naples. My life is now between Naples and Paris, which is rather a nice place,
Well,
which is quite fun.
sounds horrible.
Well, we can get there. I'm being tested endlessly with, you know, things stuck up my nose for COVID, to get there and back. But you know, when looking at some of the in Naples, of course, they have the archive, musical archives, which are fabulous, full of extraordinary things. And when you look at some of these manuscripts, then you realize it just jumps off the page at you. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. Just as, you know, anywhere, if you're in the Paris Opera, they have all these fantastic manuscripts, and they just jump off the page at you. There was one time when I was looking at the original parts of William Tell in the Paris Opera Library, the original orchestral parts, which were played for many years. And I was struck by the fact that there are no bowing marks in there. You know, string players do up and down, and they all write. And today, we have this kind of mania of everybody doing the same bowings and things. And when you see that, you realize that you have to look at the epochs and decide, okay, well, how were they playing these things? And why are there no bowings in there? Because presumably everybody saw a phrase and automatically either they freebowed, they did what they wanted, or there were just traditions in there, traditional ways of phrasing with the bow. So I'm saying all this because coming back to the point of trying to understand when these composers were living, why they were writing things, what they were reading, who were they meeting, etc. Where did they travel to, all this sort of thing. Once you build up this kind of big picture, then a lot of things fall into place as far as this repertoire is concerned, like any repertoire.
Well, any repertoire.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, no, it's wonderful because I of course wanted to speak to you about, I mean, especially interests me the uniqueness of the position of a conductor as an interpreter, because myself as just a singer or pianist, and your interpretation, it's just you. You interpret it for you in the audience, but for a conductor, you have to find your way to an interpretation, which you're kind of describing now, and then be kind of responsible for an entire group of people and an entire kind of concept or an opera, the entire production. So it's great that you talk about a bit about those first steps, because I absolutely wanted to ask you about kind of what goes into the interpretation of a piece and those beginning steps with understanding a piece.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's what it's all about. The more so you look at a piece, and then you try and set into the context of the composer's life, and you fill it with all this information that is, today we have this possibility of getting information from, off a screen when we want and how we want. But you fill it with that. So whether it's a contemporary piece, whether it's a Baroque piece or whatever, I guess I go about it in the same way. Those steps that I take. So I look at a piece, I analyze it, and then I feed it with all sorts of other things. And I guess my interpretation then just happens. I'm not thinking, okay. I remember that when I was starting out as an assistant conductor, I didn't do that for very long, but there was a very famous conductor who I assisted on one production. And I looked at his score and I saw these markings all over the place. And I said to him, so what's all this about? And he turned to me and he said, oh, that's interpretation. And my theme for him went like this. Okay, so it's as much as saying I'm going to slap myself onto this piece, rather than doing it from the other way.
Yeah.
Which seems to me to be more integritous, if that's a word, has more integrity. And can you say integritous? I don't know.
We can now.
We can now, yes. Shakespeare-like. It's because, yes, I mean, the most important person in this is the lady composer or the man composer. They are the most important people.
Yeah.
And you have to get yourself out of the way. And the only way in which I think you can bring their music to life is if first you get yourself out of the way, but also when you're working on their magic, if you like, your duty is to find out all about them and understand why they're writing in the way they are writing.
Yeah.
And that's got nothing to do with you.
Yeah.
It's very easy as a conductor to get in the way.
Yeah.
Difficult to get out of the way. It's difficult to be simple. It's very easy to be complicated about things. And the only way I think you get yourself out of the way is by treating the person who's written this stuff as God.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I'm just sort of thinking about it exactly.
I mean, there are difficulties with some people. If you take Ganacek or somebody, and you go and look at his manuscripts, which are difficult to decipher. And then there are all sorts of places in his scores where you have to make certain decisions because sometimes it might not be particularly clear. And I think that's somewhere where perhaps you do have to step in. And there are some composers in some composers' works where you have to step in because sometimes people need help. But you don't step in, I don't think, saying, I have, it's me. At least I try not to step in.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose that also sort of, no, it's wonderful. It answers my second part of that question, which would be, do you ever feel that you arrive or finalize an interpretation? But I think you just answered that yourself, because it's the process of getting closer to a piece and a composer.
Yeah. No, there's no, till my dying day, I will never reach the bottom of some wells, that's for sure. And that's the wonder of it. That's why we do it.
Yeah.
And especially as one matures, and life gives you the knocks, then of course your interpretation, in inverted commas, changes. Because when you read a novel and then you reread it a few years later, it's not the same novel. It's the same with a piece of music, because we're different.
Yeah. I'm curious on a slightly more day-to-day basis. How do you? First, are you quite a routine person, and do you have sort of a daily process with music learning? And I guess the other side of that question is, how do you kind of fuel creativity and curiosity in your daily life? Maybe that's the better question.
Yeah, the routine has never been something I've been very good at. I've always admired people, who have this routine. A Benjamin Britten or somebody who composed in the morning, then it's in the afternoon. There was this routine. Schubert, come what may, he composed. He had this discipline where he had to do. I've been very bad at that. I guess there is in one sense a little bit of an excuse, in the sense that one's life as a professional musician, sometimes you can't, because you're traveling, and then you go to rehearsal and you have to do whatever. So I do try, certainly in this COVID time, I've given myself much more discipline than I've had before, and I've been very in the sense that I try every day, if I can get to a piano, I play some Bach every day, for instance. So I guess that's a bit of a discipline. But having getting up at certain times and doing a certain amount of this and doing this and this and this, I've never been good at that, and it's not a way in which I work. But I don't know why that is. Perhaps it stems to my childhood, where I was at school or something. I don't know, but it's not something I've been good at, and I wish I could do it better. And sometimes I force myself, and then it doesn't work.
Yeah. No, I think I feel with everyone that I've had on the show, everyone's daily process is so different, and it's fascinating, actually, because everyone's ends up in their authentic self. But so
and what's your routine? Do you have a routine?
I'd say it's pretty flexible, but the only thing that I do is I do play piano in the morning, every morning, Bach as well. Just something from the well-tempered clavier, just to start the day.
Yeah.
But,
good.
That's it. Otherwise, it's quite scattered with practice times and but and I guess to sort of expand on that question, what's the sort of general role of creativity in your daily life, or maybe a better word is inspiration? I mean, do you kind of gravitate towards listening to music and reading? Are you a big reader?
Yeah, I'm a big reader. I gravitate to music. I don't listen to much music, I have to say.
Yeah.
I read a lot of scores, but I'm not someone who's going to put on a CD. No. I don't do that, unless somebody says you have to listen to this artist, or you have to listen to this piece, which I can't get all the score. In that case, yes, I do. But it's very rare that I would put on a CD because I want to listen to it. No, I don't do that very much.
Interesting.
I used to. I don't do it very much now.
Yeah.
I think because I prefer to look at the score and imagine it. Or I don't know why whether it's a good thing, whether it's a bad thing, or whether it's a natural progression, I don't know. But being creative is, I think that's possibly how one can stay creative in that way, because I think, you know, we live in an age where recordings, especially visual things now, have taken over, and I've found that when I got sucked into that kind of feeling, then I was losing my creativity, because it's very easy to be influenced by other people who are doing the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was finding it. I don't know if other people find this as well, but I was finding it was hampering me in certain ways, and so I stopped. And perhaps that's just, it's carried on, you know, it's just filtered through. But I find the creative process is through doing all sorts of, I do quite a lot of manual things, and especially at the moment because we're moving house, so I'm being creative, trying to find space for boxes. But I do enjoy doing manual things, and I think that clears the head quite a lot. I do a lot of reading, and I enjoy reading in different languages, which I think helps the creative process as well. So that's the way I stay creative, I think. And when I'm looking at scores, to go back to the point we were talking about earlier, I think if one is so passionate about the people's work that one is performing, then that's going to keep you creative as well. You know, because one is discovering things all the time.
Yeah.
And I think it's,
and it always, it's kind of lights us, it ignites a spark, you know. You go down a rabbit hole of this person and that person.
Exactly. Yeah. It's fantastic. We're so lucky to be working in a profession where you can do that.
Yeah. And it's endless.
And it's endless. It's endless. It's full of beauty and endless joy.
Yeah.
Which, you know, that's not given to everybody. And it's sometimes easy to forget that we are very lucky. You know, even in these desperate times, we are very lucky to be able to sit down with our instrument and play through scores. Just that, you know, that in itself is a gift. And if one takes it like that, then I think one is going to be creative, whatever happens.
Yeah. Beautiful. I mean, so we're speaking at a very specific time in sort of history of, especially as musicians and everything. It's very, you know, silent, for lack of a better word. And I'm curious, during this time, do you feel that there's been an objectivity that sort of allowed you to perhaps view the role of a classical musician, or your role as a classical musician, differently within society or within a bigger frame?
Oh, that's a massive question, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
That is really, I don't know, it's how long is a piece of string question. Yes, but I think it's too early for me anyway, too early for me to actually analyze it and say what. I go through days where I think I found an answer to something, and how to get through, and what one's role should be and can be. And then the next day I wake up and realize that no, that's not going to work, you know. So I think for me it's too early for me to say anything about it. I'm just trying to get my act together most of the time, and hang on to the small amount of work that's left at the moment, all the other stuff that's been, and then when one actually does get to do something, you know, I was lucky enough to be able to do something last week, and the joy of performing, but I found a great amount of angst in there as well. That I found that my the French would say point de repère, you know, my points of reference, were not quite where they were before, or should be somehow. I don't know why, or perhaps it was just a psychological, you know, my brain playing tricks with me. but there was something going on which I couldn't analyze, and I found it very difficult to sometimes to actually focus properly in the same way that I thought I was focusing properly before. Perhaps I hadn't been focusing properly before. It's quite possible, but I don't know. I think it's too early. As I say, it's too early for me to tell.
Yeah, yeah. That
I don't know if you're finding the same thing, but somehow the performing experience isn't the same. Especially as you know, the thing I did last week, there was an audience.
Exactly.
And music is something where you realize you need an audience. It's not something you do in a studio, and it's sterile. Although of course there have been some great artists, some magicians who've managed to create that, like Glenn Gould or something, in a studio.
Yeah.
I'm not one of those, and I realize that I need people around to react to what I'm doing.
Do you think that after this, do you think there's any sort of going back to normal after this especially in our world? Or do you think that, I mean, I know you said it's a little too early to tell, so of course perhaps we can throw the question away, but yeah, is there a going back to normal, or do you think that things might look entirely differently for us?
I think things will be different. Going back to normal, things as they were before, no, because financially, there are some institutions which, haven't been able to carry on, full stop, and have to change their strategies and all sorts of things. So I think that's not going to happen. It's not going to be normal. So, the thing I would say is that I guess I'm a little bit disappointed in one way, in that perhaps it is an opportunity to draw in different audiences in different ways. And I think lots of institutions have been quite slow about doing that, just waiting for us to get back to normal, waiting for it to stop, and then we can get back to normal. That's the sort of mantra, if you like. If I take an example, the amount of streamings that have happened over the last year, there are so many streamings that they're coming out of every orifice. But the way they're being filmed, for instance, is, for the most part, if we're being brutally frank, is so tedious and so boring that that hasn't changed, and yet we're living in a visual world, more of a world than oral sensitivity, if you like, or world. And so that I'm rather surprised that those sort of things haven't been taken on board in a different way. If someone's streaming a concert, you're still getting the shots of the oboe player and sucking his reed and the solo, the concert master playing his solo. It's been filmed in the same way, and so that I find disappointing. And I'm not saying I would know how to do it, because I don't. But perhaps it is an opportunity to bring people in a different way, which I'm not sure has been exploited.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly illuminates that, because we're stuck to this, because this is our only way of communicating.
Yeah.
And it does highlight that. Suddenly it's, okay, wait, how can kind of what we do catch up with technology in a way? Yeah.
I think that's a profound question that we, in our day and age, we have to ask ourselves.
Absolutely. I mean, we can't deny that, actually.
No.
Yeah.
But to get back to your question, things after this, whenever and however we get through this, it can't possibly go back to the normal as it was before, however much people want it to.
Yeah. Jonathan, it's been so wonderful chatting with you. I want to ask you my last question, which kind of hence the title of the show, and ask you, how do you feel, or when do you feel music can be revolutionary?
Oh, every day. It depends how you go about it, how you go about your music making, and whatever music you're playing, whether it's contemporary, whether it's Baroque, classical, whatever. Every single day is revolutionary, which is the bliss. We've just been talking about that we have this possibility of this wonderful, rich world, and we can be revolutionary in it just by digging and digging and digging and digging and exploring. And I think there's nothing more revolutionary than doing that, is there?
Nope. Love it. Oh, Jonathan, thank you so much. It was so nice to chat with you and see you again after all this time.
Well, likewise, it's been a real treat, real treat.
Yeah,
and thank you so much for asking me to do this.
Oh, my pleasure.
Yeah.
So wishing you all the best, and that we see each other at some point in somewhere in the world. But
yes, it would be nice. It would be nice. And make music together again.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Even better.
Let's do that.
Yes. And to everyone who tuned in, thank you so much. And we will